The launch of Final Fantasy XVI is upon us, and everyone wants to know, how does it stack up? After playing the demo, a lot of people are ready to jump back in and experience the world at full, see everything it has to offer, get engrossed in this story, the combat, and everything else. And in today's video, I'm going to be bringing you my review after roughly 20 hours played of the full game. It's important to note that I am absolutely nowhere close to the end with 20 hours played, but I do feel I've played enough that I can give a confident review of my experience and how I feel about the game at this point. I also want to note up front that this review is spoiler free. We are not going to be talking about any story elements whatsoever that could spoil your own experience, and all the footage that you're going to see in the review is going to be stuff from very early in the game, stuff that you're going to encounter within the first few hours. With all that being said, my name's Cowboy, and let's jump into it. And the first thing I want to touch on is going to be the gameplay. Now, Final Fantasy is a franchise that has evolved greatly over the years, with 12 seeing a pretty big departure from previous games, and then more iteration in 13, more so in 15, and now with the launch of 16, we are seeing a full action RPG. And this is a pretty big step for the franchise, because even in previous entries, there was still turn-based elements, and that is completely gone in this. And honestly, I'm a huge fan of it. I think a lot of people are either completely on board with it. There's been a couple of naysayers that think it's no longer Final Fantasy, but rest assured, this game is about as Final Fantasy as it gets, and we're going to be talking about why a little bit later. But focusing on the gameplay and the combat in particular, it is incredibly engrossing and fun, and even now, at 20 hours, I'm still just absolutely loving the combat as I continue to play. At this point, I have roughly 3 Eikons under my command. I think it's important to note that I have been doing everything this game has to offer. Every single side quest, the main quests, running around and fully uncovering the maps. So far, there has been no stone that I have left unturned on my journey. And so I've had a lot of time with a chance to kind of perfect the combos and perfect weaving my various iconic abilities in together. And it's just been, like, honestly, just an incredibly joyful experience. I think there's a couple different things that help amplify this. For example, the ability to respec your various iconic abilities and your upgrades and take points from one and put it into another to really find a play style that lends itself to you and one that you're going to enjoy. But in general, the combat is incredibly fast-paced. On the surface, it definitely seems like you're just kind of mashing buttons, and I think to an untrained eye, that may be what a lot of people see. But there's actually a lot of nuance to the combat, such as timed parries, perfectly timed dodges. Every icon that I have encountered so far in terms of abilities has a specific ability generated or designated around counterattacks. So for example, with Garuda, we have a counter where if we time it, we're going to evade back and then dash in forward and do a series of kicks with a Garuda talon on our legs. And so it's just this system that there's so much going on at the surface. And I think one of the interesting things is that as I continued to play the game and the combat, and I got more and more hours into the game, I was still constantly learning stuff. Like, I'd say probably up until the 10-hour mark or so, there were still new mechanics I was learning, like learning how to use Magic Burst properly, figuring out that I could do my Charged Burning Blade both on the ground or I could use it in the air to knock people up, figuring out how to perfect my air combos and how to do juggles. And there's just so much with this combat that it's very rare that I find that I play a game and then as I'm playing it, I'm progressively learning more and more and more as I experiment. And not more in the sense of like, oh, hey, I unlocked a new ability, let's see how this works out. Just more in the sense of like, oh, wow, I've had this ability for a couple hours now and I just realized I can do something else with it that I hadn't done before. And it's that level of gameplay that kept the combat fresh. As I mentioned, even now, at 20 hours in, there are still new combos I'm discovering and new combinations of weaving iconic abilities in certain ways to push the stagger gauge even farther on enemies. Early on in the game, I was getting staggers around, say, about 10,000 when I thought I was doing good, and now I'm doing 25,000 on staggers. So there's definitely tons and tons of room to grow with this combat, and I think that's one of the things that keeps it so refreshing throughout the experience. Now, to talk about the non-combat gameplay a little bit, you know, your exploration and kind of how that's going to work, I do think it is very standard Final Fantasy, and to an extent, it's actually not unlike the 7 Remake, if you've played that. While there are open map areas that we're able to explore and run around with a bit more freedom, a large majority of the areas are going to be more linear and story-driven, and so you're going to go down a pre-designated path, you're going to fight packs of enemies, you're going to be looking at the environment around you, looking for treasure chests, But for the most part, there is always going to be a straight path forward. And honestly, with as long as this game is, I do think an approach like that is needed. As I mentioned, this is also supplemented by the free roam type stuff, where you're going to go into zones and have the freedom to just explore the zone and do a variety of activities. There's also activities that are going to expand as you play the game. When I got past what I would describe as the first disc of the game, and just for clarification, obviously I'm playing digital, there are no discs here, but there was a point in the game I reached where significant events happened. Afterwards, there was roughly a 5-year time shift, things resumed, and to me it felt very much like a Disc 1 had been completed and I was moving on to Disc 2. So with that in mind, when I had moved on to this proverbial Disc 2, there were even more activities that opened up. All of a sudden there were rare hunts that I could go on and find monsters that were a higher level than me but rewarded rare materials that I could craft into things. There were more side missions opening up. There were alternative paths of exploration that opened up, which, as you can probably guess, involves a chocobo. Of course, we do get chocobos at some point in the game, which is quite nice, just to make traversal even faster than it already is. But what I'm loving here is, as I continue to play the game, more activities open up. And when I thought for a bit, oh, okay, I guess this is it, main quest, side quest, main quest, side quest, the game's like, hey, what about some hunts? Hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? And there's just all this extra stuff that came in that really enriched the experience, I felt. So overall, I am a huge fan of the gameplay, and like I said, honestly, right now, it was a struggle to stop playing to even record this review. I had to talk myself down, because I was at a point where I was like, I really want to continue the story right now, but I really got to get this review done. So needless to say, I've been having a blast with the gameplay, and it's definitely been a struggle to put it down. Now, moving on to the story, while we're not going to be talking about any specific elements of the story because I wouldn't want to spoil this experience for anybody, I will say I have been enjoying the story immensely. The start has a very Game of Thrones-esque vibes, and that's something I've heard a lot of people mirror sentiments about, is that this darker story with the way they're telling it, and that does persist throughout. There are very, very few moments where you don't feel just how punishing and cruel this world is. And one concern I actually had somebody mention was, they said, is there anything light? Is there anything cheerful? And to be honest, in this world, there's not much. It is a much darker world than we're used to with Final Fantasy, and that's definitely going to sell itself as you play the story. There are certain areas which I found a little funnier, little bits of dialogue here and there, especially from side characters that I got a good chuckle out of. But for the most part, the game keeps you very engrossed in this world, and just the unfairness of it, and really showing what Clive and his companions are trying to overcome. And I think this does expand even more as you work your way towards the later parts of the story. One of the big things I found myself enjoying is there's obviously a lot of mysteries coming out of the prologue of the story, the start that we had access to in the demo. And I got far and I got a couple answers, but for every answer I got, there were 2 more questions that popped up. And even now that I'm at a fair point into the story and a fair chunk in, I still have tons of questions. And even now, even in the most recent episode I recorded, which was like part 36, there were new questions coming up in that part where I was like, hold on, what is this? What implications does what I see right now going to have? And so it's something that I find myself just really, really enjoying as I continue to play this. Is the story does not stop. Like, even when you think you've solved one mystery, the game's like, yeah, but what about this? And you're like, hang on a second. Like, it doesn't give you breaks, and that's what I love about it. And I shouldn't say, there's actual literal breaks. You can take a break from the story and go do side content, but there's so much going on here, and it honestly really does a good job of maintaining that Game of Thrones-esque approach. But not only that, I think one of the best ways it does that is the game does a fantastic job of keeping you informed throughout. Through the addition of the active time battle, or active time lore, where we're able to basically pull up the little lore bubbles at almost any given time and get kind of a quick tip section on stuff. Obviously that's fantastic in the moment for if there's anything you're unsure about. But even at the hub, there's a character that we'll just call Tomes, and you can talk to him and basically see a full history of all the events you've done so far, and you can move it through a timeline. So you can advance this timeline, and you're seeing various people on the timeline at various periods of your adventure, and you can look at all these points that would have been active lore moments. And so the game just, not only does it have this phenomenal story, but it gives you the tools to make sure that there's never a point in the story where you're like, I don't know who this person is. This doesn't make any sense to me. I'm lost. Like, obviously there's going to be mysteries and people you don't know who they are, but there's never a point that you feel lost. There's never a point that feels like you don't understand what's going on, because the game actively tries to keep you informed as the player. And that's something that I absolutely love about what they've done here. And this doesn't just apply to the story either. The game also does a very good job of just keeping you abreast of everything that's going on in the world. Besides tomes, there's also an NPC you get to meet later that you can basically recap the state of the world at any time and get like a lore refresher. They'll go through the various events of the story. You can replay this type stuff. You can see how the map is changing between various factions and where wars are being waged and what battles are being won and lost. And it's honestly just such a fantastic approach to have these tools at your disposal, so that not only do you have this story and you're getting engrossed in this world and you're learning about these characters and these places, but at any time you're able to immediately just get a refresher. Even if there's just one thing, like, who was that one character again? Boom, you know who it is. And then there's going to be like, hey, while you're talking about this guy, you should also know about, this is where he's from. This is what he's known for. This is the province that he's in. This is what implications it has on this part of the story. And it's something that's just never seen in games. And with a story like this, you essentially have a full in-game wiki at your disposal at any given time that's going to keep you completely up to date on all the elements of the story and the world. And that truly is something phenomenal, in my opinion, for a game like this. Now, talking a little bit about the graphics and performance, of course, this game has a performance mode, which is supposed to be 60 FPS targeting 1440, and then graphics mode, which is supposed to be 4K targeting 30 FPS. I initially played through the majority of the game in performance mode, and then I'd say after probably the 5-hour mark or so, I switched over into graphics just to see the difference, and I actually ended up preferring graphics. The game obviously is going to go at a slower frame rate through all the cutscenes and whatnot. You know, movies, for example, typically run at 24 frames per second. And so, given I don't know anything about frame analysis, you know, I'm not Digital Foundry or anything like that, but I would assume the cutscenes run at 30 FPS because that's essentially industry standard. And to that extent, I found playing in graphics mode to be a lot more preferable, because when I was in performance, while the combat was a little bit smoother, I did notice a little bit of almost muddiness on the models. I think part of that might be the fact that I'm playing on a 4K monitor and it's pushing out 1440, so obviously I'm seeing that pixelation. But playing on graphics mode, I didn't notice that anymore. Now, obviously, you're going to get different returns on this depending on the type of monitor or the type of TV you're playing on, but I will say that all in all, I did find the graphics mode preferable to performance. I will say the game does take gratuitous use of motion blur. Motion blur is typically something I'm not a giant fan of, and this game loves motion blur. Whether it's, you know, certain super fast-paced scenes in the combat or even some of the faster animation scenes, the game definitely relies on motion blur in instances where the frame rate would drop to, you know, give you almost the illusion of it being smooth. But it's never in a way that I felt was actively detrimental. As I continue to play, you know, even now, even up to part 36 of the Let's Play series, I'm still playing in graphics mode. And there was never a time where I was like, oh man, this is so bad, I can't see what's going on. And obviously, y'all know I play pretty much every game under the sun. I consider myself an incredibly broad variety of gamer. And I've absolutely enjoyed my experience so far when it came to performance. In terms of system slowdown and whatnot, I haven't had any issues. I have heard rumors of people saying that their PS5's overheated during certain encounters. I haven't encountered anything like that myself, and obviously, I mean, I have a launch PS5. I play games all day, every day, and, you know, no issues like that. So just wanted to be upfront about that. In general, I will say that if you are absolutely worried about frames, just play in performance mode. But keep in mind, all the cutscenes, all the talking, all that stuff is going to, by default, be not at 60 FPS, so I think you're going to get a better bang for your buck playing in graphics mode. Moving on from there, I want to take some more time to talk about the in-game systems, because not only do we have systems in place to allow us to recant the lore and the story, but there are a lot of like really, really, really nice quality of life things in this game that I'm a huge fan of. First off, let's talk about the respecking. So obviously, instead of having a sphere grid or anything like that, we have our ability grid. And as we play through the game, we level up. But namely, as we finish up combat, we get ability points, and we can freely spend those ability points to upgrade different abilities. But what's nice is we can also freely refund them. And so what I found myself doing was refunding points, testing out new abilities, taking abilities and mastering them to see how they evolved and what specifically changed with that, what made it stronger. And then, some cases, refunding ones I didn't like. And even now, there are abilities that initially I had tried and didn't like that I've then gone back to because I've realized other synergies with those abilities that I didn't have access to previously. And I'm like, oh, well, this little fireball thing that I didn't like all that much, if I combine that with my lightning thing, they actually go pretty damn well together. And now I can do about 10,000 damage really fast. So that's actually pretty cool. And that freedom is so damn nice. I mean, I hate that every game, you want to respec, that's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you a larval tier. It's going to cost you this rare resource that there's only 2 of in the game. Like, just let people experiment. And this game does a fantastic job at that. And it's not just experimentation with your skills, but even experimentation in the combat. Because once you get to the hub and you go through kind of the starter stuff, you actually gain access to what's essentially just like a virtual battle test. It's not unlike the battle tests from 7, but we basically just load into like a virtual type area using a ancient runic thing. And when we're in there, we can freely modify a variety of things. We can pick what enemy we're going to fight. We can modify cooldowns. We can determine whether they're going to attack, whether we're going to have companions with us. And it just gives you a playground, essentially, to test out your moves, to perfect your moves, to perfect your combos. And especially as action-oriented as this game is, I think that's something that is incredibly valuable to have. Another thing that I found particularly useful is the way that we can find side quests. So obviously you're able to just see the little side quest icon throughout the map. But even then, at any time, if you're skipping side quests and you go to the world map, you can just hit square and a button will just come up with nearby activities. And it'll tell you like, hey, there's side quest here, there's a hunt here, and it'll just list the various things that you can do in that zone. So the game always makes an effort to keep you informed, but in a very natural way. It's not like we don't have to go to the journal and scroll through a bunch of quests, even though there is a journal for you to look back and see what you had done. We don't need to track stuff through it. And that's something that I found incredibly useful and just intuitive. And I guess almost the best way to describe it is I think back to when I played Ghost of Tsushima, and there was just a very natural way to navigate the world. And while it's not as integrated into the UI as that, it does just flow. Like, there's never a time where getting a quest or finding a quest feels cumbersome. It's always right there at your fingertips, and that's something I loved. Moving on to talk about sound and music design. I mean, obviously, I don't need to say anything here. Soken is composing the music for this game. This soundtrack is about to be an absolute banger. The music in the game has been phenomenal. The boss fight music has been phenomenal. The music when you're just like going around in one of the hubs or one of the towns, it's just nice. Like, I could just put that stuff on loop and probably play it and lower the volume a little bit, and it would put my kid right to sleep. Like, there's something about the way this dude makes music. It's just soothing and it feels good. And it's just, that's it. It's fantastic. Like, I mean, I don't know anybody that's going to go to this game and be like, yeah, I didn't like the music. Just disregard their opinion. Their opinion is worthless. That's all I will say. As for the sound design of the game, though, sound design is really good. One of the big things I liked here is I don't think they get too overly on combat chatter. I find a lot of games get kind of heavy on combat chatter. In particular, God of War Ragnarok comes to mind with Mimir yelling that you're on fire constantly. And for the most part here, you're only going to really hear combat chatter when you do certain things. If you switch between your icon, Clive might call that out. He'll be like, fire, come to me, or lightning, or, whatever, very briefly during that swap. When you do like an execute on an enemy, he might have a little one-liner as he finishes them off. But even then, for the most part, there are enough diverse little sound bites in the collection that you don't hear too much repeats, which is something that's nice to see. Now, I will say, unfortunately, this isn't the case in tubs. One thing I noticed is like certain towns or certain villages I'd go to, and I would hear villagers having the same chatter that they did the last time I was at that hub. And obviously this chatter is going to evolve as things go on. But for example, anytime I went back to the main hub, there was always one guy talking about how we needed more lumber and blah, blah, blah. How are we going to get more lumber? And I'm like, 5 hours in, and I'm just thinking like, damn, this man still needs lumber and he hasn't gotten it. And obviously that's something incredibly minor. It's a small NPC that just happens to be off to the side. But it's the little things like that that you tend to notice when there's not really much else wrong with the game to pick apart. So kind of talking about that, like where I saw faults with the game. So initially early on, and even somewhat into the late game, I will say the side quests are very hit or miss. There's some side quests that you go through them and you're like, okay, this is getting way deeper than I anticipated for a side quest. This is crazy. And then there's other ones that are just straight up fetch quests. Early on, the game really likes its fetch quests. Like, hey, I need you to go grab me these spools of thread, or hey, I need you to go kill this thing and get me some item from it, or hey, I need you to go to this town and talk to this guy and get my item. And there's a lot of that. Thankfully, it's all side quest stuff, so, if it's not something that you fancy, you don't really need to worry about it. And on top of that, for the most part, the side quests just tend to give you materials that go towards crafting or some gil. There are a couple side quests that tend to give you very big rewards, and what's nice is those are marked separately. For example, getting your first chocobo, that is an explicit side quest. Getting certain unique equipment are explicit side quests, and these have a little plus icon on them as opposed to the standard side quest icon, so it is very easy to differentiate those. Unfortunately, there's no way to differentiate what are the best side quests, because like I said, there are a couple that I went and did them and was like, whoa, this is not the kind of content I was expecting out of a side quest. And it was so shocking, because I remember the specific part in the story, and like during that part, I'm like, yeah, some of these side quests are getting a little fetch questy. I gotta run over here and do this, blah, 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 drop off food for people. And then I did one, and all of a sudden I was like, yo, what the hell? Like, is this for real right now? Is this actually happening? And like, obviously I don't want to spoil it, but it just came as a complete shock, because I had just gotten done delivering meals to people. And then all of a sudden it was like, hey-o, story element side quest that's kind of messed up that you're probably going to want to pay attention to. And it's just, the game keeps you on your toes. I'll say that. That much is for sure. But in conclusion, how do I feel about Final Fantasy XVI? Well, it's phenomenal. This game is an easy 10 out of 10. Honestly, as it stands right now, this would be my game of the year. If I wasn't recording it, I would just be sitting in my bed like a complete degenerate playing this nonstop. Before this came out, I was playing a bunch of Diablo. I'm pretty much not touching Diablo right now, because anytime I have a spare moment, I'm like, I should go record some more Final Fantasy. Oh, dinner's done? Are the kids in bed? I'm going to go record some more Final Fantasy. Like, every waking moment that I have right now that's free, I'm coming and I'm playing this game. And what's crazy is, like, obviously I make content and it's my job to make content, but I already have episodes for like 2 weeks out. And typically I'm like, okay, I got 2 weeks of episodes, I'm going to take a break. That's never been the case. There hasn't been a moment with this game where I've been like, I should take a break. Pretty much every night since I've had it, I'm frequently awake past midnight, usually closer to about 1 a.m., just because I don't want to stop playing the game. And I think that's really a testament more than anything to how good the thing is, because I'm somebody that plays a lot of games, and usually I'm pretty good about being like, it's 11 o'clock, time to get ready for bed. And meanwhile, I'm like, it's 12:30, I think I can get one more recording in before I have to sleep. So honestly, this, like I said, this is my game of the year right now. There's a couple things I'm really excited for. Armored Core is the only other thing on deck this year that could potentially unseat this for me personally. But even then, as it stands now, looking at the competition, I know a lot of people think Tears of the Kingdom is going to do good. Nah, man. Y'all don't know what you're in for. Like, the story, the combat, the voice acting, the music, like, this game has the full package. If there was ever a game that deserved the 10 out of 10, it is this. This is an absolute glorious return for Final Fantasy, especially after 15, which I was not a giant fan of. I found 15 to be rather lackluster, and by comparison, this is such an amazing breath of fresh air. Like, the last time I was unable to put down a Final Fantasy game like this was the first time I played Final Fantasy VII back when I was a teenager. That's how damn good it is. So either way, I am wrapping things up here. I have a full Let's Play series going up on the channel. Going to be rolling that out at 2 episodes per day because this game is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and it's easily going to take up an entire month. Either way, thanks for coming on by. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you on the Let's Play series.